This lecture is going to be about the integumentary system, which includes the skin and its accessory structures such as hair and nails, and also glands in the skin such as sweat glands and oil glands. So, functions of the integumentary system, the big one is protection. The skin serves as a barrier to protect the inside of the body, prevents fluid loss. It's important in temperature regulation, mainly via sweat glands that help disperse body heat. Vitamin D synthesis, it plays a role. So, sunlight hitting the skin helps activate vitamin D. And also immunity, as there are some immune system cells in the skin itself. And then we have sensation, which just means that parts of the skin can sense, touch, and feel. So we have nerves in the skin that allow us to feel things. And then lastly, excretion mainly refers to releasing substances such as sweat and oil and getting them out of the body. All right, so the skin is the largest organ of the body. It consists of two layers. There's an epidermis and a dermis. Underneath the dermis, there's a hypodermis, which is not considered to be part of the skin, but it is there. It's mainly made up of mainly adipose tissue and some areolar connective tissue. And so if we look at the epidermis first, it is keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. There's 4 cell types present. Most of them are keratinocytes, which contain the protein keratin. So remember, some cells fill with keratin as they're moving towards the surface of the skin, as they're migrating towards the surface. They also have these molecules called lamellar granules, which help form a waterproof layer on the skin. Melanocytes make up another group of cells. They give skin its color. They secrete a pigment called melanin. Langerhans cells are immune cells that are in the skin. And then Merkel cells, sometimes called Merkel disc, are sensory structures in the epidermis. The head of them has a little disc on it, so they look like this. So a Merkel disc or Merkel cell is a sensory receptor in the epidermis. So here's a picture of the overall picture of the skin. So right now we're focused on this. This is the epidermis. Everything from here to here would be the dermis. And then this is the hypodermis out here. The hypodermis is also known as the subcutaneous layer. So going back to the epidermis, there are 5 possible layers. Most parts of the body only have 4. So we're going to start the deepest portion, which would be down here. This would be the stratum basale, sometimes called stratum germinativum, but we'll call it the stratum basale. It's the deepest layer. It consists of 1 row of keratinocytes. There's some melanocytes and Merkel disc there also. And these cells are the ones constantly dividing. And when they divide, they migrate up towards the surface. So they undergo cell division. The next layer moving towards the surface, stratum spinosum, 8 to 10 rows of polyhedral keratinocytes. That means they're kind of like star-shaped and spiny, the cells. So that's how it gets its name, the stratum spinosum. Just think like kind of odd-shaped, spiny-looking cells. Some Langerhans cells there too. A little bit of cell division, but most of the cell division occurs at the stratum basale. So this is the stratum spinosum in this area. The stratum granulosum is where sometimes you can see it change in color like you can here. This is known as the transition layer because this is where the cells are filling with keratin and they're also dying. So there's also some lamellar granules here, but 3 to 5 rows of flattened keratinocytes. This is where they transition from being alive to filling with keratin and they die. And then as we get to the surface, more to the surface, some parts of the body are going to have this layer, which is called the stratum lucidum. This is only found in the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet, and that's what we call thick skin. And if this layer is there, it's 3 to 5 layers of flattened, dead, clear keratinocytes. So it's supposed to be a more clearish layer. It may not really look like it here, but a clearish layer, but they are dead keratinocytes here. And remember, this is only found in the palms and the soles. Then the most superficial part, it's called the stratum corneum. That would be all this. So many layers, 25, 30 layers, flattened dead keratinocytes. There's some lamellogranules there. These are the cells that are constantly being shed and replaced. So that sometimes in the microscope slide, you can actually see them coming off. All right, so those are our 5 layers of the epidermis. Remember, most parts of the body are going to have just 4, and then the palms and the soles will have the stratum lucidum also. So that process by which the cells move from the stratum basale towards the surface is called keratinization. It takes about 2 to 4 weeks. So onto the dermis. So the dermis is actually connective tissue. There's 2 parts. There's a papillary region right near the epidermis, and then the bigger reticular region below. So these little structures here, little mound-looking things, are called dermal papillae, and that's basically the papillary region of the dermis. That's the part that consists of areolar connective tissue. And as far as sensory receptors, you'll have the Meissner corpuscles. Those are little oval structures found in dermal papillae. They're also sensory receptors. And you may have free nerve endings there. Free nerve endings are just dendrite endings like you see here in this picture and here. So very sensitive. The reticular region, which is the bulk of the dermis, is dense irregular connective tissue, and you have a lot of stuff in here. So you'll have hair follicles, so parts of hair comes down here. We'll talk about hair. Sweat glands, oil glands, all that in here. Other sensory receptors, like you have this thing that looks like an onion. This is called the Pacinian corpuscle. This detects pressure. So it's pressure and deep pressure and vibration is what the Pacinian corpuscle detects. So we'll talk more about those receptors shortly. If we look at this picture, you can see the dermis again. This is the sweat glands. So sweat glands look like coiled up structures with a long duct that goes to the surface. This is a different type of sweat gland. So there's 2 types of sweat glands. This is our main type, merocrine, also called ecrine. We have another type called apocrine that will be emptying its sweat into hair follicles like this. These are oil glands. We'll talk about these also. All right, so thick versus thin skin. Thick skin has all 5 layers. That's the palm and the sole. And the stratum corneum is going to be a lot thicker. Thin skin doesn't have the stratum lucidum, and also the stratum corneum is not as thick. So remember, thick skin we find on the palms and soles, thin skin everywhere else. As far as skin color, so pigments give skin its color. The main pigment that gives skin its color is melanin. There's different shades of melanin, brown, black, tan, yellow, and that gives us a variety of possible skin colors. And so skin color is determined not only by the shade of the melanin, but also how much is actually produced. Then we have some other things playing a role. Keratin is a substance that can give skin a yellowish or orange tint. And then hemoglobin in blood can also influence the color of the skin. So especially if you have pale skin, if you get hot, you might notice that the skin turns red, and that's just you're seeing the blood underneath it, and blood has hemoglobin, which is reddish. So individuals with different skin tones generally have about the same number of melanocytes, but the melanocytes secrete different amounts and then types. So that's the different shades I was talking about, and then also the amounts. So underneath the dermis, we have the subcutaneous layer, which is also called the hypodermis. It's not considered to be part of the skin. It's mainly adipose tissue. There's some areolar connective tissue in there. You have sensory receptors there, also Pacinian corpuscle. Here's a picture. And remember, it detects deep pressure and vibration. And moving on to the accessory structures. So as far as nails, nails are found on the fingers and toes, and they're basically derivatives of the stratum corneum of the skin. So they're cells filled with keratin. So they're dead cells and they're hard. So as far as the anatomy of a nail, we have the nail plate, which is the main part. There's a free edge that hangs over the edge that you could scratch something with. You have the body, which is the main part, and then you have the root, which would be underneath the skin here. So if you want to look sectioned picture of the nail. You can other things to identify. So the nail, this is the nail plate again. So the nail bed is what the nail lies on. The matrix is down here. That's where cells are dividing. And so basically what's going on is cells divide here and they migrate out this way. So it makes the nail grow. And so nail matrix is here near the nail root. The lanula is this white little crescent shape. It's basically a thickened region of the nail where you can't see beneath it. So if you look closely at your nail, you might see that most of your nail, like up in here, has a pinkish color to it. That's because you're seeing blood vessels underneath it. But in this area, it's thick, so you can't see through it, so it just appears white. So that's called the lanula. The eponychium is the cuticle, so this little strip right here. And then the hyponychium is where the free edge meets the finger right here. So eponychium is the cuticle here. Hyponychium is underneath the free edge. So let's talk about the hair now. So hair is also called a pilus. That's the official term for it. Also, is very similar to nails that consist of keratinized cells. So anatomy of a hair, there's different parts, but for starters, the part above the surface is called the shaft. Anything below the surface of the skin is called the root. And the root lies in this structure called a hair follicle. And if we look at the anatomy of just the hair itself, there's the inner layer called the medulla. Outside of that, there's a cortex, and then there's a cuticle. So just FYI, in anatomy, you'll see these terms a lot in medulla and cortex at least. And so medulla generally means the inside of something. Cortex is outside of that. So you're seeing that here. Medulla is on the inside, then cortex. It's just in this case of the hair, we have another layer called the cuticle. If we look at a hair follicle, that's the structure that surrounds the root. And so there's two layers. There's an inner layer that's made of epithelial tissue, an outer layer made up of connective tissue. So inner epithelial, outer connective tissue. You can see there it forms an expanded region down here at the base of the follicle. That's called the bulb because it looks like a light bulb. Papillae of the hair is just this opening. They call it dermal papillae here. We'll call it papillae of the hair just to keep it separate from the skin. So papillae of the hair is that little opening. And if you look closely, you can see some blood vessels in there. So same picture. Down here near the papillae of the hair, we have what's called the matrix right here. That's where the cells are dividing, just like we saw in the nail, and they divide and migrate this way. It causes your hair to grow. Surrounding this, which is not shown, we have nerves surrounding the base of the follicle called the hair root plexus, and allows you to sense things if your hair moves. Erector pili muscle is this muscle right here. It's smooth muscle, and when it contracts, it causes the hair to stand up. So this is involuntary. So when you get goosebumps, these muscles are contracting, making the hair stand up. And then sebaceous glands are these oil glands that empty oil into the hair follicle. So sebaceous glands. All right, a little bit about hair color. Melanin determines hair color. That's why we have different colors of hair between individuals. As we get older, we lose melanin in the hair. That causes it to look whitish or gray. Then as far as growth, hair on average grows about 1/3 of a millimeter per day. It'll go through a cycle for a few years. Then it'll go dormant for a few months, and then it'll start all over again and push that hair out. So it's normal to lose a certain number of hairs per day. So anywhere from 10 to 100 is considered to be normal. So you may lose more than that, and it's not necessarily a huge problem, but it is normal to have hair loss. So if you see hair falling out when you brush your hair, it is a normal thing to happen. As far as the glands, so we have oil glands. They secrete oil. The oil is called sebum, and they secrete it into hair follicles, and they become really active at puberty, and this is why teenagers oftentimes get acne, because these oil glands get blocked ducts. So acne is caused by blocked sebaceous ducts. As far as the sweat glands are called sudoriferous glands. There's two types. Merocrine is the main type, also called ecrine. We got 3 to 4 million all over the body. They have this coiled up structure, long duct going to the surface of the skin. So they're found all over, but lots on the palms, the soles, forehead. And that's the sweat that they secrete is mostly water. Then there's ions in there like sodium and maybe some waste products, maybe some nitrogen. And then we have the other sweat glands called apocrine sweat glands. They look similar. They're usually a little bit bigger here at the bottom. They're still coiled up, have a long duct, but the duct goes into a hair follicle. So these are the sweat glands we have in armpits, nipples, pubic region. They secrete a different type of sweat. It has more protein and fats in it. Empties into the hair follicle, like we said, and these become active after puberty. And so this is the sweat that actually has an odor to it. So it might give you body odor because it has all these proteins and fats in it. And I just put down here that they do secrete via exocytosis. Remember, apocrine was a term that we use to describe cells where the apocrine portion gets pinched off. But I think that's why they were initially named this. But in reality, they do secrete via exocytosis. Not a big deal. That's why that's here. Then we have ceruminous glands, which are sweat glands in the inner ear, and they secrete earwax. This earwax is called cerumen, and it's thought to be protective in nature. All right, a little bit about burns and then skin cancer. So as far as burns go, there's first degree, second degree, third degree. So let's keep this relatively simple. First degree basically means one layer is affected. That's the epidermis. So like think of a mild sunburn, healing 3 to 5 days, no scarring. Second degree, 2 layers, epidermis and part of the dermis. So this is where you get blistering, takes a longer time to heal, 2 to 4 weeks, may get scarring. Examples, severe sunburn, liquid burns. And third degree is most serious. 3 layers affected, epidermis, dermis, and the hypodermis. May not heal completely, may need a skin graft. This could be deadly fatal. This is what you would see mainly in burn units of hospitals. So causes would be fires or chemical burns. As far as skin cancer goes, there's 3 types I'm going to cover here. The most common type of skin cancer is basal cell carcinoma. Originates in the stratum basal. Not considered to be as dangerous as the others because it usually doesn't spread or metastasize, and can be treated early by detection and removal. Squamous cell carcinoma originates from the keratinocytes, treated again by early detection. This one's a little more risky because it can spread, can metastasize. And then the most serious is called malignant melanoma, which arises from melanocytes. It does metastasize to other areas, treated by early detection and removal, but it could also require chemotherapy or radiation therapy. And then there's an ABCD rule of identifying these lesions. So A stands for asymmetry, so it's not symmetrical going around. B means it has an irregular border, like it's not smooth. C stands for color, like different shades like you're seeing here. And then as far as diameter, greater than 6 millimeters. So you can see each one of these ticks is a millimeter. So this is way bigger than 6 millimeters. So that's the ABCD rule of identifying skin cancer.